Good evening, everybody. My boss over here has just told me it's gone 6 o'clock, so we have to start. So welcome everybody to tonight's OSB. Just a general reminder to people, first of all, the meeting this evening will be live streamed to the public. A recording of the meeting will be available on the council's website within 24 hours of the meeting. Can all members, when they want to ask questions and so on, can they please stand and turn their microphones on and then turn them off again when they've finished? There are two reasons for that. First way is that by doing that, we get to hear better. And the second thing is that the automated system picks up the fact that your microphone is on so that you get the correct people on the video. Any exempt items on the agenda, we will go into private. I don't think we have any of those tonight, do we? No, so none of that. Any reporting officers using Teams, please use the hands up icon on your screen for questions and comments, and turn cameras and microphones on when speaking and off when finished. And can all members please, all attendees, please put their mobile phones on silent or switch them off, please. Right. So, on to apologies first.
Yes, Chair. Apologies for absence from this meeting have been received from Councillor Gallagher with Clive Mead present as sub for her, and apologies also received from Councillor Raja. Chair, thank you.
Okay, thank you. The minutes of the meeting of the 23rd of October. Does anybody have any issues with those minutes, or do we accept them and I can sign them off? Any comments or questions? Yes, Councillor Steve.
Just one small point to Eunice, if I may. I noticed that sometimes when you're doing the minutes, it talks about a member said, and on other occasions it gives the name of the councillor. Could we be consistent in that going forward?
I'll take your comments into consideration.
Yeah,
but there are times where
it's quite good for us to be, if we're looking back, to remember who said what.
That's correct. But there are times where it might be necessary to actually refer to a member who is making a significant point during the course of the conversation. But I'll take that into consideration.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Any further comments or queries about the minutes, or can we accept that those are okay? Okay, so that appears to be all right. I'll sign them in due course. Okay, now just so that you're aware, just a few bits and pieces. We have an outstanding process going on where there were ambassadors associated with the Step Forward Luton. There are perhaps people here like me who have not been into their emails late afternoon today, but the names of further ambassadors have been circulated by Eunice on your council emails, so you'll be able to see some more names associated with that. I've got an announcement here to make about members of the public, but I don't see any.
I don't see any members.
Okay, so
yes, we might skip that.
So I think we'll skip that one. Right. Now, the town centre parking, the controlled parking zone consultation report, you will have seen that the report is going to be discussed this evening, and I'm pleased to see that it will. Councillor Stevens has also done some additional work, and although it's not in the report, I would like to make the figures that he found available, and I believe that Eunice has some prints.
Chair, I've made those available, just sitting in the centre table there for members to pick up.
Okay. And perhaps just immediately before, don't do it now, but immediately before that item on the agenda, if we can distribute the papers that are on the middle table, please. The corporate performance report.
Right.
The corporate performance report, when we were at our last meeting on the 23rd, we discussed the idea that we might perhaps get more advance notice of that corporate performance report to allow us to pose questions. I can tell you now that there has been a meeting set up for me to meet with the corporate director, Mark Fowler, and other officers to have that conversation so we can explore the right way to do that. I wondered what that was then. It was a repeat of me. Okay. Also, just for the board to be aware, we did make a reference at our last meeting that the area controlled parking zone consultation, we made an agreement that we would submit our own report regarding the delay in submission to the executive. And I am able to report to you that at the executive meeting, the executive noted the concerns that we had raised with OSB, and they also resolved specifically that the interim service director, customer and organisational development, would report back to a future meeting of the executive on the 390,000 amount of budget put aside in 23-24 for recruitment and retention of hard to fill posts. So in other words, executive have taken on board what we recommended about issues to do with recruiting and retaining highway staff, and are going to look into the matter and come back to us in due course. So I'm very pleased to be able to report that. When we get round to the work programme, you'll find that there are some new items on the work programme, and we'll discuss those when we get to item 11. Have I missed anything out? Okay, so moving on to the agenda, I would like to move, please, the airport item 10. Oh, sorry, I have to do the others first. Are there any disclosures of interest?
Just for the minutes, I am a director of Luton Rising.
Likewise myself, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any urgent business?
None, Chair.
Any references from committees and other bodies?
There are no references, Chair.
Okay, thank you. So going back to where I was, I am going to move the airport report, item 10, to the top of the agenda, and then we'll resume back at the beginning of the agenda as it is in your papers. So I would like, if we may, to move directly to item 10 on your agenda pack, and that's at page 133. So over to the officers.
Thank you, Chair. My name is David Gertler. I'm a planning consultant who's worked with...
In the past, you've been able to participate, so you don't have to. Thank you.
Sorry, I'm a consultant who's worked with Luton Borough Council for quite a number of years, giving advice on airport-related development. You may recall back in 2020, the OSB requested that the annual monitoring report, which is prepared by the airport operator, be presented to OSB so that the OSB could look at it and provide comments and any recommendations going forward. So since 2020, we've done that each year. The report is the airport operator's report. This one that is being presented to you is from 2022. So it doesn't cover anything like the development consent order that's now currently subject to the examination. It doesn't cover anything like the DART, which came into operation this year. It literally looks back at 2022 and what the airport operator did in 2022. It arises from the fact that the airport has produced it for donkey's years. But in 2012, there was a planning application when a legal agreement attached to that decision to allow the airport to expand to 18 million required them to produce a report which met certain criteria, certain reporting. And they've done that each year, and we've reported back on it. This year there is a change, and that does relate to the fact that in 2021, there was a planning application for the airport to expand from 18 million passengers to 19 million passengers. That application was subject to a large public inquiry, which lasted over an 8-week period in 2022, but we only got the decision of the two Secretary of States in 13th of October 2023. But as part of that public inquiry, there was a new legal agreement drawn up, and that legal agreement now refers to the annual monitoring report as a sustainability report. So the sustainability report actually has a different format to reports that we've brought to the committee before, but it does cover the items that the airport is required under the legal agreement to provide information on. So that gives you the background in the report. I propose to use, sorry, can I just admit one of the airport people is trying to come online. I've got a little slide presentation, which hopefully will appear on the screen. I'm assuming that members have read the report. For simplicity, you'll see under paragraph 10, there are 6 bullet points. Those bullet points tell you what the chapters are in the sustainability report. The airport actually provides us in the sustainability report with a lot more information, in my opinion, than they previously gave us. And if you want all the detail of their performance in terms of noise, in terms of complaints, in terms of air quality, passenger numbers, aircraft movements, those are all contained in appendices at the back. The airport reports to the council and to the consultative committee every quarter, producing quarterly monitoring reports. Councillor Franks sits on the consultative committee, and great detail comes in these quarterly monitoring reports. These are then summarised in the annual report for the year. So to give you examples, on ensuring environmental responsibility and efficiency, that section of the report covers all sorts of things ranging from surface access to noise, light pollution, air quality, carbon emissions. The information is all there. There's a lot of text, and then there is detail in the back. My slide presentation will concentrate on the detail. The second section on supporting the local community gives you more information about how the airport works in the surrounding area. And there is what's called the community fund. And again, I'll provide some detail when I show the slides. Creating a safe and secure airport looks at the way the airport operates and how many, in the report, it will tell you how many new security staff they've taken on board, what new security measures are in place in accordance with government criteria now for all the main airports in the country. Growing with our people, I would just point out a couple of things. The airport does work, obviously, with Luton Borough Council, and our, I apologise if I get terminology wrong, but the Business Intelligence Unit or the Employment Team, the Economic Development Team, work with them in terms of recruitment. And you'll see there's a programme in paragraph 29, it talks about getting to airports. The airport operator seeks to introduce people into jobs in the airport. It has job fairs, which it works with the council, with the job centre. And in 2022, they became a real living wage workplace. They've got a whole new salary structure was implemented with additional parental leave. And they introduced an equity and diversity and inclusion strategy. So the report, if you read it, their report, it's quite lengthy. I think it's 90 sides of, so it probably works out at about 180 pages to it. There is a lot of text, and then there's the appendices at the back. But it is really, in my opinion, it is really interesting that it does tell you an awful lot of what the airport has done in 2022. Obviously, one of the key things for the airport in paragraphs 30 onwards, delivering a great customer experience. That is really important to the airport. So there is a whole chapter on that. And then providing a sustainable supply chain, which is important to Luton and the surrounding counties. And this is something that came up in the 19 million public inquiry. It also does come up in the development consent order examination. And you'll see that they've got 53% of their spending is on local suppliers within 25-mile radius. It is very important benefit to Luton as a town and to the wider region. So just to take you to the presentation. That just confirms the changes, that it is now a sustainability report, and it re-emphasises there is court and monitoring reports. These are the key facts for 2022. You'll recall in 2019, before COVID, the airport reached 18 million passengers. Obviously, in the last two reports I brought to you, things suffered during the COVID period. In 2022, they're up to 13.1 million passengers. That's quite an increase on 2021, but obviously still 5 million passengers down on what they were in 2019. There were 118,000 aircraft movements. Again, that's a big increase on 2021, but in 2019, they had 141,000 movements, so it's still down on that. There's 32,000 tonnes of cargo went through, which again is an increase on the previous year. You may not be able to see this. I apologise. The table on the left tells you annual movements of different aircraft types, and the reason 3 are highlighted in yellow, which you probably can't read. They say they're the A320neo, the A321neo, and the Boeing MAX, 737 MAX. Those 3 aircraft are the new engined aircraft. They're the modern, quieter generation aircraft. In 2022, they amounted to 17% of aircraft movements at Luton Airport, which is a high figure compared to other airports. I won't spoil your fun to where they are now, but they're nearly double that this year. So that's the figures on the left. Next year, I will tell you how many they got up to in 2023. And then the table on the right is information about the aircraft movements in each month during the night period and the early morning shoulder period. So the key facts to know on this are that there are planning conditions that restrict the number of night movements to a maximum of 9,650 movements, and they were under that at 9,157 movements. And then for the early morning shoulder, that's when the aircraft take off first thing to begin their routes. They're restricted to 7,000 movements, and they were at 4,666. The next tables are information about what are called track violations. Aircraft are meant to follow a certain noise preferential route. If aircraft depart from those routes, then it's a track violation. If it's a departure for a valid reason, the airport investigates all these, and if it's a departure for a valid reason, then no fine is imposed. So air traffic control might have told an aircraft it had to take a different route, or there may have been storms or something. So, but this shows you that out of 118,000 movements, there were only 48 track violations. So it's 99.6% of aircraft comply with the routes. If they are fined, the fine goes to the community fund, which gets invested back into the community. And I think it was £60,000 worth of fines in 2022. So again, just a summary table, 118,000 movements. That's 83% of what it was when they were operating at the maximum. 13 million passengers, again, 73% of 2019 figures. Track performance was very good at 99.6%. That's the same as it has been for the last 3 years, I believe. They've complied with the condition that controls daytime and nighttime summer contours. No breaches of that. And on the 1st of December this year, we'll get a report to find out what happened in 2023. But the prediction again is that they'll have complied this year. In 2022, the most properties that the airport has managed to insulate took place. 114 properties were insulated. That was nearly £500,000 worth of insulation. 960 something properties were actually approached, and 114. Not all the properties accept, and some get put on the list, and then the consultative committee has a subgroup which decides which properties are going to be allocated each quarter for insulation. There were 10,676 complaints, which is actually less than 2021, even though there were more movements. So it says that 20 people were responsible for 80% of those complaints. There was a concerted effort to get objections in, because the airport was introducing an airspace change in 2022, and this is the one where they've split the stack for Stansted and Luton. It would look like two big balls of wool intertwined, the aircraft flying around going to different airports. They've separated through the CAA and created Luton's own arrival stack, separating the aircraft from the Stansted ones. And there were a lot of objections came in associated with that consultation that took place and the operation. On air quality, I have got Andrew Loosley here if you've got specific questions, but they complied with the UK standards on particulate emissions and also on NO2. So although there was an increase from 2021, it still was at the objective level set by the government. Then there were about 11,100 employees in and around the airport, which is getting back to where we were in 2019. And I've already said they've introduced this new salary structure, parental leave, real living wage. They also introduced the net zero roadmap, which ties in with Luton Borough Council's objective of 2040. So for scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, the ones that the airport can control, they've introduced this roadmap with a target, and the airport has 2 representatives here and 1 online if you've got further questions on that. And then just to confirm, the Community Trust Fund had £150,000 in it, plus the fines. 13,000 people were reached through that. That includes things, grants to things like food banks. They also introduced a new fund, which is called the Greener Future Fund. That is not in the legal agreement at all. That has £100,000, which the airport has put into it, and that's gone to local schools, charities, and community groups, looking at carbon emission issues and biodiversity. So it's called the Greener Future Fund. So I think this is the final slide. Just to confirm, there's no breach of the nighttime or daytime noise contours in 2022. The night flights remain under the quota that's set by the planning condition. The early morning shoulder flights remain under the quota as well. And going forward for next year, in the sustainability report, you can expect us to report back on, in my opinion, 3 interesting things that are happening in the near future. One is going to be a noise reduction strategy, which is required by the planning condition in the 19 million Secretary of State approval. Another will be an updated travel plan, and a third one will be a carbon reduction strategy. All 3 of those I would anticipate being submitted towards the end of this year or the beginning of next year. So hopefully that there will be some reference in next year's report. And just to confirm, in next year's report, the DCO will not appear as a permission or anything like that, because the DCO examination goes on till February 2024, and we won't get the Secretary of State's decision on that until towards the end of 2024. So that won't appear in next year's report, but I just put it there to make clear that that is something that is ongoing in this year and next year. Thank you. So sorry, the recommendation was for Overview and Scrutiny Board to consider the sustainability report for 2022, provide feedback on its presentation and content to help improve future reports in line with the requirements of the legal agreement attached to the 19 million planning permission. If you have any questions.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much indeed. I just want to check with Eunice. Have these slides gone out to everybody yet, or will they go?
Will go out.
So we have copies of all of the slides, which it's only just come in to Eunice this afternoon. So she will distribute those slides to everybody, so you will have them in your inbox in due course. Okay, can I open then for questions from the board? Can I try and suggest that we try and keep them to the period that the report covers, rather than just wandering aimlessly into what I know are all very current issues that people have with DCO and so on. So let's try and confine ourselves, if we can, to what period the report covers. So questions, please.
I don't have a question, but I get the impression that 1 or 2 members are a bit confused about declarations of interest, and I thought it might be helpful if I explain how that was dealt with on previous years when we've looked at this report. The report is primarily about the activities of the operating company. If the debate strays into the business of the council's airport company, i.e. to talk about the DCO, for example, then at that stage, directors will need to declare an interest. Provided you stick to the operations of the operating company, there should be no need for any declarations of interest. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, I'm sure it will be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I will try not to wander into the new territories, because as you're quite well aware, there was an important motion that went through full council, which to do with the airport, and I'm sure that will be deliberated upon quite soon. But let me stick to what has been presented here, and to raise firstly a question, if I may. Could I ask, please, how many windows do you understand can be insulated against noise from the £3,800, which I understand was the amount of money, maybe moving up slightly to over £4,000? So how many windows exactly are insulated, can be insulated? Because I know the answer to that.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to quickly just introduce myself and my colleague on site tonight, and then the member of the team who's online, who will be actually the person to answer your question, because he's our Chief Operations Officer and the one personally involved in that scheme. So my name's Oliver Jaycock, Director of Corporate Affairs at the airport. With me is David Vasquez, Head of Sustainability. So here to tackle any sustainability related questions. Neil, I'm going to throw Councillor Stevens' question over to yourself, if I may.
Thanks, Ollie. So yeah, as Ollie said, I'm the operations director for the airport. So the noise insulation policy is published online, and it's any habitable room up to the value of £3,800.
Your good self, then. Would you understand that if you were able to insulate perhaps 3 windows, that noise will still come through the remaining windows of the house and also through the roof? In fact, probably most of the noise will be coming through the roof. Would you accept that?
Yeah, we offer a range of solutions to double glazing, secondary glazing, ventilation units. So it depends on where the noise is coming from, which rooms are most beneficial, and we conduct before and after sound monitoring in a number of properties as well, just to assess the effectiveness. And generally, the people that have had insulation have been very pleased with the work that's been carried out.
No, I'm sure residents are quite pleased with what's been coming out, but it's not insulating the noise. That's my main point that I want to say, because that noise is still coming through the remaining windows and most of the noise is coming through the roof. So I'm wondering what the airport is going to consider going forward, now that you're at 90 million passengers per year, to actually increase the support that's given to the residents that are suffering, both in the South Ward and in the East Wards.
Yeah, as I said, the people that have had the insulation carried out have been very pleased, not from the look and quality of the windows, but from the benefit they're getting from sound insulation. And we have proposed to increase the scope of the scheme as part of our P19 application as well.
My second point, please, if I may, I don't know if that's to yourselves or to your good self. Do I understand it that the noise readings, the only noise readings that are accepted are those in the permanent monitors which are out in the countryside? Would that be correct?
It depends what you mean by accepted. So,
well, sorry, the only ones that are used for taking the noise levels, and those were the noise levels exceeding. It's not taken. I understand that the operating airport company has given noise monitors to people in their gardens, but it's not used. So when they actually report it, in fact, they've stopped reporting it, because I understand that when it's exceeded in their gardens, it's not being used by the airport at all. Would that be a fair understanding of the situation?
No, not at all. So we conduct monitoring all over the surrounding areas around the airport. Anywhere that's overflown, we conduct noise monitoring exercises and we publish those monitoring reports. I think what you're referring to is our noise violation scheme. That's at fixed points at either end of the runway, and that's in line with the aircraft noise certification points, which are 6.5 kilometres from start of roll. But all the other noise records that we take are either used to gauge change in noise over a period of time, or to calibrate the noise contour model that's part of our annual noise contours. So yeah, all the noise results are used. They're either used to assess change in characteristics or calibration work, but nothing gets ignored. We share all that data online as well.
But what do you actually do with that data when the residents in their garden are indicating that they have that noise has exceeded the permitted level? What is done with that data? Because I understand it can't be used to find the aircraft.
No, so the permitted levels are at fixed points. So we can't just change the levels depending on where you are to the airport. So the fixed points are in accordance with the aircraft noise certification points, which are a global set of standards for certifying aircraft noise set by ICAO. So these are at 6.5 kilometres from start of roll. If you're closer to the airport, then the noise is going to be naturally louder, but those noise events still get used to calibrate the noise contour model, or just to assess impact on communities, how it changes over a period of time. But nothing gets ignored.
Could I understand that that the company would believe it's a worrying trend that more people are now making a complaint? It may be less complaints because people, as I've said, that have monitors in their gardens and other residents have stopped complaining because they believe that nothing is done about their complaints. But can I please understand that? Sorry, I'll throw myself off the pitch. So that the other point I was going to make, that although I think it said that 45% of the complaints were made by one complainant. Do I understand that there are certain organisations that are capturing the complaints on behalf of the residents? So it may look as if perhaps that that one complainant is making what are 45% of those complaints, but in fact, can I also understand it that there are one or two significant organisations in the town that are capturing the complaints on behalf of residents?
No, that's not true at all. So every complaint that we receive gets recorded and gets reported to the consultative committee, and it's also captured in the sustainability report. A number of factors can generate complaints, and as we've seen over the last couple of years, that was driven, a lot of that, by communities around the Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire area for the AD6 airspace change. And there's a process that's required to follow with an airspace change where there's a post-implementation review, and that closed in September this year, and we've seen complaints drop off significantly since that finished. But a number of different events, the weather can change, so if aircraft fly in a certain direction, that can generate complaints. We monitor trends of complaints over periods of time, and we take every single complaint seriously. So when we're looking at airspace changes, we're required to look at complaints. So yeah, complaints for us are really important, and complaints, as Mr. Gertler said, complaints reduced in 2022 compared to the year before. So we have seen a reduction in complaints recently.
The next point, if I may, Chair. Is not really covered in the report, but it's at a background to all of the complaints coming from residents. Most of the residents in Luton South believe, and some of them have lived in the ward for 40 years, 50 years, that the flight path has moved closer to the conurbation, closer to the town centre. I know that the airport would say that hasn't happened, but I would rather believe hundreds of residents that are saying that that has occurred. And in fact, one of the motions that's gone to full council is asking whether the flight path could be looked at, and that's supported by all the councillors in the council chamber.
Yeah, first of all, we have to follow a very stringent regulatory process to change flight paths, and I can assure everybody, we haven't changed any flight paths. But we have, from the request of another councillor, we have arranged a meeting in South Luton in Q1 for next year. So that's in the process of being organised at the moment. But the only thing I can imagine with this is, as we've seen with the NEOs, the aircraft getting slightly larger, and that can give the impression that they're closer. But we haven't changed any flight paths at all.
Come back a minute, Chair.
Come back to you again if I may in a moment. Yes, Councillor.
Yeah, thank you. So I just want to say, I mean, look, the airport prides itself on being embedded within the local community. Just one of the things I'm sure all the councils here care about is social mobility. So when it comes to employment, it says here the figures at the airport increased by approximately 5%, 11,000 employees. The airport prides itself on tackling poverty in the town. One of the ways we tackle poverty is by giving high-skilled jobs to local people and young people in Luton. So do you know off the top of your head how many of those high-performing roles or well-paid jobs or jobs in total go to residents that are living in Luton, that come from Luton?
Neil, I can start this one. I don't know if you have any of the figures, but in terms of those people employed in an LU1 to 4 postcode, which I think are probably the ones most local, I think that's significant now. I think it's over 80% of the workforce are employed within those postcodes. And to David Gertler's point earlier on, we take pay at the airport very seriously. And I know that in terms of roles across the board, we pay over, obviously, the average. So in terms of the airport itself now being a real living wage employer, we do pay good salaries across the board. Neil, do you have any further breakdown?
No, I can't go into detail around sort of postcodes, but I think just from recent pay discussions, pay talks that we've had with with the unions that, for example, our security team are within the top 10% in the region for paying security wages. So yeah, we do offer market leading packages, and it's not just salary, there's other benefit packages we offer as well around profit share, around private healthcare. So we offer a very attractive package, to the point where we've had staff that in lockdown left to go and join places like Amazon, Lidl. They now want to come back to the airport. So I think the real living wage piece, as Ollie said, has been very important to us. But I think also as well, developing skill, developing talent locally. And we offer all jobs locally as well. So any job that gets advertised within LOL gets advertised locally first. So we try to recruit local people into the airport because we realise how important it is.
Thanks.
Yeah, just picking up on this postcodes of employees issue. Can you confirm that the statistics that you're quoting relate only to employees of the operating company? And do you have any information at all on the addresses, postcodes of the employees of the other 200 odd employers operating at the airport?
Yeah, well, I'd like to think that as the operating company, we're representative of all companies. Of course, I can't speak on behalf of those 200 or so organisations, but I think it's fair to say, being a Luton-based employer, they're employing a lot of Luton-based people. One of the things that we are trying to do moving into 2024 is to get some richer insights from those organisations directly. But as you would appreciate with data protection and those sorts of things, it's not a straightforward task, but it's something that we're, working firmly on.
Councillor Booth, please.
Just one other question on climate change. Air pollution's a problem in Luton. I know there's been lots of concerns around how climate friendly the expansion, but I won't get into the expansion. But in terms of, how on target are you to meeting your target of net zero 2040 emissions? And it says on-site renewable energy, 25% of use from such sources by 2026. How close are we towards that target?
Thank you. Thanks for the question. David Vasquez, Head of Sustainability. So we've published our net zero roadmap recently, and that of course outlines the main initiatives that the airport has to implement between now and 2040 to become net zero. There's a big focus, of course, on the emissions that the airport can reduce and the airport controls directly. And then, of course, we aim to influence the emissions of third parties such as airlines and service access providers. Your question about the net zero roadmap is focusing on what we can do ourselves and we control. And we have achieved quite a few achievements, I would say, it's fair to say. Made a lot of good progress this year, something we're very happy and proud about. We were just this summer, we were the company with the most next-gen aircrafts in the whole of Europe. Yeah. And that is something that, is being a really collaborative piece across teams across the airport to get there. We have started work to develop an on-site solar farm. So again, to generate renewables on site and rely less on the national grid. We have, of course, that has been launched, and that has made a huge impact in terms of how people get in and out of the airport. Again, a big milestone for the airport, working in collaboration with our partners at Luton Rising, and is fully electrified, therefore, saving in emissions as well. There are a number of initiatives that could go on and on, but it feels like we do provide quite a bit of colour in the report in terms of how we're performing against. And I would say that we are on track to meet that target.
I'll just add to that by saying, and hopefully you can see that or get a flavour from the report, that we've got a really good sustainability picture beginning to build at the airport. There's a huge amount of work that's been sort of taking place over the last couple of years, particularly during COVID, believe it or not, which gave us the opportunity to reset, really double down on these challenges. And we're beginning to see the headway of those improvements now. And sorry, and just to your question, we fully expect that the solar site will be fully operational, as we've outlined, by 2026, hopefully before.
go back again, Councillor Stevens. I promised you could come back, so I'll allow you to do that.
Thank you, Chair. My last thing was, congratulations. I think 17% of the new aircraft are now quieter.
In 2022, in 2023, that's, as David mentioned, double those figures, which is the highest across the whole of Europe.
Which is very good, but obviously we're worried about Luton, not about the other parts in Europe. Well, we are worried from the point of view of the country reaching net zero by 2050, but also we're worried about reaching net zero by 2040. Can I ask whether the operating company has set a deadline by which companies have to be using the quieter aircraft? I know that there is a specific problem that I know residents face, which is the freight carriers, who I understand quite often will go buy second-hand aircraft, which tend to be noisier than other aircraft. So if there isn't a deadline, can I ask why not?
Yeah, I mean, I can pick this up. So we haven't set a deadline yet because there's lots of issues around supply chains and making sure we get the aircraft online quickly enough. What we have done over the last couple of years is incentivise all our main carriers to bring in the NEOs into Luton, which is why Luton has one of the highest rates, if not the highest rate of modernised aircraft in Europe. So it's really important to us to get the benefits from those aircraft. We're working with commercially with all carriers to get them into Luton sooner rather than later. And with cargo, we've banned the noisy cargo aircraft at night time. So QC2 aircraft, which are the noisy cargo aircraft, are now banned at night time from Luton.
And just to add to what Neil's just mentioned, I think we should also praise the three largest airlines based at Luton, and in particular the largest in Wizz Air. And actually they're on a trajectory to have 100% next-gen aircraft by 2025, which outstrips any other airline in the world. So again, significant progress taking place at Luton.
If I understood, if there is a deadline or not, is there an actual date?
No, there's no deadline at the moment. We're incentivising rather than setting a deadline.
More questions or comments? More questions or comments? No? Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. We appreciate the time and effort that you put in, and thank you for answering all the questions.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Board. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just checking, but we're now back onto the sequence that you'll find within your paperwork. So we're now moving on to item 7, which you'll find on page 21 of your data pack, which is the Newtown area controlled parking zone. We did mention that there are additional papers on the central table, is that right, Eunice? We give those out so members can see the additional data that was collected by Councillor Stevens as well, although it's not included in the report. Okay, sorry about the wait while those were distributed. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chair. Tonight's report is in relation to the Newtown area parking control, the controlled parking zone scheme that we looked at a consultation from. A little bit of background. The scheme goes back quite some time. It was actually initially envisaged in 2018, where a consultation was conducted. The responses came back. It was fairly split, marginally in favour of the scheme not going in. However, the Ward Council at the time felt that there were some roads within the consultation area that should be pushed forward and continued to be consulted on and considered for the scheme. Obviously, the COVID pandemic hit and basically crippled our budgets for parking and everything else within highways for a little while, and the scheme was put back a few years. Obviously, we tried to then keep it on the agenda whilst trying to keep up with the programme that we promised as part of the 5-year programme that we put forward for executive every year. As a result of that and some staffing issues that we've discussed previously, the scheme was delayed until this year. The consultation was conducted in April. It was done via letter, circulated to 587 properties. We had a response rate from 128 of those properties that were surveyed, which is around 21%, which for a highways consultation in relation to parking, or any consultation for that matter, is pretty reasonable. It's acknowledged it's not ideal. 21% of 100 obviously is only a fifth and not great, but we've got to work with what we get, unfortunately. And like I say, based on previous consultations that I've conducted, I'd say the response rate is fairly on par with what we get. The overall responses were 65 in favour of the parking scheme being implemented, with 57 against. So a very slim margin this time again, but with those demonstrating in favour. The recommendation was then made to implement the scheme and was discussed amongst the ward councillors. There was a lot of back and forth discussion about what the consultation results demonstrated, whether there was enough of a majority in that to be considered moving forward as a scheme. It was acknowledged that, yes, the response rate is 20%, but as previously said, this is fairly standard for most highways consultations that we do. In the end, it sort of came down to the portfolio holder decision, and Councillor Stevens with Charmaine Isles against it, owing to the fact that she wasn't happy with the consultation response rate and felt that it was an impact on residents at a time where people are struggling to, fund day-to-day living, that they couldn't afford to take on top of that. Councillor Stevens was a bit confusing, mostly in favour, but then there was some back and forth. It was suggested that all the councillors go out and conduct their own sort of informal private consultations effectively that we will review as part of a deadline, which we did. He managed to get around a large portion of the area, but not the whole of the portion by the time that the deadline had been reached. We reviewed those, and I believe it presented, again, a fairly sort of slim majority, similar to what our consultation, as the formal council consultation, demonstrated. So then the decision was made with the portfolio holder that the scheme go in ahead as per the proposals, but with the minor amendment for Councillor Stevens, that it go in from Monday to Friday rather than Monday to Saturday, and the hours of operation only be 2 hours, so 10 till 12. Obviously, the report's been included as part of this, which I assume most people have sort of cast their eyes over and had a look at. So I'm happy to discuss the findings of the report. The purpose of tonight's OSB is to inform the board of the outcome of the review, which obviously was duly done with the report, surrounding the installation of the control parking zone of Luton.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark, as well. Yeah, it's a very good summary of the conversations I think that took place. However, there's one mute point which is missing, I think, and that is that in fact Councillor Hussain actually gave the go-ahead to you to do the work, and that came out in that, and it's not mentioned in here because that's quite a salient point, in fact. So that already a go-ahead has actually kind of been given to yourself by Councillor Hussain, because I think he wanted things to get underway. That's the first thing. The second thing is that during the discussions with myself and Councillor Isles, we were given the opportunity to go round, and I presumed some credence was going to be taken of the results that came back. Unfortunately, we weren't able to get in to add the result from Park Street, I think it slightly missed the deadline, but I think it was important to give that result nevertheless. Of the houses with whom, or with the residents with whom we were able to engage, there were 14 that were in favour of the scheme going ahead, and there were 4 that were against. And I think if you totted up then the final figures, it showed that 123 were in favour and 107 were against when you added those ones from Alton Road into the equation. The only thing that I would have to put in as proviso, however, is that during my and Councillor Callagher, who very kindly helped me when we were talking to the residents, mainly in Cutenhoe Road, there probably was in the region of about 18, perhaps some of the, including some of the other roads, a figure about 18 that said they were happy to go ahead so long as they didn't have to pay for it. But they are included in the people that have said that they want to go ahead. Now, I don't know. I leave that up to Councillor Hussain, the portfolio holder, to decide what he wants to do about those figures. I presume because those residents are saying that they want the scheme, happy the scheme to go ahead, and it's a matter of payment. It's something that I understand we don't take it into account anywhere else in the ward or in the town. But that would, I think those would the main points that I wanted to make. Though there is one further point. I understand, Mark, that from the point of view of Cutenhoe Road, if it goes ahead, there will be no parking bays. I'm not quite sure why parking bays are going to be needed in Seymour Road, in Alton Road, and in Park Street, where residents already are able to find spaces. It might be an unnecessary cost for the council to start installing parking bays if the scheme goes ahead. If Councillor Hussain reconfirms and executive reconfirm that this is what they want to go ahead, I'm not quite sure if we should be putting in parking bays if they're not necessary. That's the first point. Second point or third point I would make.
Yeah, I'm surprised to hear that raised. Something we obviously discussed, to be fair, at great detail during our meetings and discussions. The reasoning behind that is Cutenhoe Road obviously is a fairly straight road that's very wide compared to the other surrounding roads, particularly Alton Road, Seymour Road. And therefore, there's the scope to allow parking to be self-enforcing. On Seymour Road, Seymour Avenue, Alton Road, they're much narrower roads. They've got bends in them. There's a lot more crossovers that need to be considered. The minute people are sort of parking on bends inappropriately near junctions, and without us enforcing that correctly, i.e. putting the parking bays in, this will be allowed to continue. And we obviously have a statutory duty in relation to road safety, and I'm not comfortable installing a road scheme where I know there's safety issues raised at the moment that can be, dealt with as part of the scheme. Regardless of whether the scheme goes in or not, I have some proposals off the back of that with regards to putting in some double lines to restrict the parking in some of these inappropriate areas that we'll be looking at as a side issue. But it's hoped that these could be dealt with at one big scheme rather than having split up into different phases like might have to do.
There's one more important thing. Really, it's about the whole about the whole results from the consultation that came back to you. Having worked in the university for 27 years, where research is was a prime roles that we got involved in as academics, there's absolutely no way that you would accept 15%, 21%, anything below 30%. Even 30% is on the cusp. 50 to 60% is considered excellent. Probably 30%, 37%, probably, okay, you can get away with 30%, but there is absolutely no way whatsoever that as an institution or as a council that we should be using data that only manages to capture 21%, which you said is good, and 15%, which is the norm. That's just unacceptable. And I have a recommendation which I would like to put at the end of all of this.
Because we have had from you a recommendation in terms of collecting that data. I think this is the appropriate time for us to make sure that people have seen that in writing. So I do have copies here. I'm going to ask for them to be distributed, please. Thank you. In the meantime, I would ask that all board members, particularly at this point, just to, for the rest of the discussion, bear in mind that the officer has given us 3 alternative proposals in this report, and I'd like you to have those in mind when we go through the rest of the discussion, please. Oops.
Could I possibly have a copy of that, Chair? I haven't seen this, so I don't know what the proposals are.
Well, with that having been distributed, back off you go again then, Councillor Stevens, and then let's discuss the issues.
On the basis,
Looks like lots of people about to come in as well. Yes, do.
Can I interrupt first? As we haven't seen this, obviously I'm a new councillor. Forgive my ignorance, but is this allowed? Yeah.
Yes, it is allowed. It doesn't happen very often, but yes, it is allowed. The main thing about this is that this is not affecting the report that Mark has produced for you. This is adding additional items for us to bear in mind.
But sorry, can I just ask another question? So when the vote is made, this will be taken into consideration?
Councillor Stevens intends to move that as a motion, as an amendment to the motion from this committee, which, as you know, if you were at the last full council, is perfectly accepted.
Sorry, I'm totally lost here because
Okay.
I don't want to make any mistakes, but I'm not clear on how the process is supposed to work. So can somebody please explain it to me?
Okay, so as a chair, through you.
Yeah.
So as opposed to the recommendation, officer recommendation, as stated on the report, this is an alternative recommendation being proposed by Councillor Stevens. So it's up to members whether they want to vote in favour of the recommendation or whether they wish to vote against it. So towards the end, I believe, Chair, we will be taking votes.
Okay.
For this recommendation.
I would like us, though, to return to discussing the issues because we haven't reached the point where I think people have had that. Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, I mean, reading the documentation about this scheme, I've got real concerns about it because there doesn't. First of all, there doesn't seem to be a strong demand for it, and like you said, 15% response on a consultation, and this issue has been running for 5 years, 2018. So that's not, I mean, doesn't mean there's a glaring issue there that residents are really burning and about this. Secondly, I'm really concerned that a lot of the demand for it is predicated on the fact this will be free and that somebody will pay for it. And I think, from what you said, Councillor Stevens, and what I've read in the report, it says some people believe that they'll vote for it if it's free, which means that if it's not free, they're not for it. That's how I interpret it. Okay, and then obviously, I mean, I believe the scheme is also flawed, and it's going to create a lot of issues in the area. It's okay doing Cotton Hoe and doing Seymour and Alton, but it will just put parking pressure onto Strathmore Avenue, West Hill Road, and I'm just concerned that those residents there will then be kicking up and creating a fuss about why is all these people then suddenly coming to park here because it's not free, and they want to find somewhere to park. And also, given we're going through a cost of living crisis, I don't think this is the right time to be introducing this. So even your recommendations there, I don't think are relevant. I think we shouldn't be going ahead with this scheme at all on what we've had already. So that's my sort of 2 pence worth.
Come on, back in.
I move on the basis, Councillor, on the basis that Councillor Hussain has already given a go-ahead to Mark Barnett to work out the scheme, I would recommend that we go for noting the report, because the decision has already been made, is going to be made by the portfolio holder, that we note the report. I haven't finished this. I'm moving. But I would also want to add as an amendment to that, because you have to remember that the next stage of it allows objections from the community. So anyway, at the next part of it, I would like to say that it is accepted that 50 to 60% return rate for a survey is considered to be an excellent return rate, and that 30 to 40% return rate can be considered to provide a reliable figure for decision making. The board therefore recommends to the executive that such consultations, not just about this particular one, but consultations with the public, should only be considered in future if 30% or more of the residents provide their feedback. And if the 10 a.m. to 12 noon restriction is to be applied, it should be made very clear that it's on the understanding that parking attendants will patrol the area between those hours several times a week. And finally, and this goes back to this one goes back to council previous practice. To help achieve such a reliable figure from public consultations, that the executive should consider that temporary staff should be engaged on a project basis to conduct door-to-door knocking to obtain residents' opinions. That's the way to get large numbers of results. A renewal of the university council partnership arrangements where students were engaged to help with such an exercise should be discussed with the university. And I come back, if I may, Chair, that it was made very clear from Councillor Hussain that even at this next stage, that there are opportunities for the residents to object. And I would suggest, perhaps not part of the, and I wouldn't like to say what the executive want to do, but I would suggest if maybe a third of the residents object, maybe that it should be brought back to OSB to have a further look at the scheme. But on the basis that Councillor Hussain has already given the go-ahead and it's being worked on that basis, I think it's not necessary to do anything but to note the report, because that's already been given as a go-ahead to you to work on that, Mark. But the final confirmation of the decision should be made with the portfolio holder and the executive.
Now, before we vote on this at all, I'm going to let Councillor Franks make some point, then I want to come back to the officer, if I may.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I just want to be absolutely clear what we're being asked to vote on. Is Councillor Stevens proposing that we note the report and that the 3 paragraphs that he circulated go from OSB to executive as a recommendation?
Yes, I'm saying, because a decision I understood has already been made by the portfolio holder.
Back to the officer, if I may.
Yeah, sorry, just a couple of things to unpack there. First and foremost, the decision was jointly made between yourself and Councillor Hussain, to be fair. Initially, I know you were sort of against it with the hours of them, but it was you that made the suggestion that the hours go in be reduced from 10 till 12. So it wasn't solely Councillor Hussain that made the decision.
If it went ahead, would be far keener, even those who are against it, to have a 10 till 12 time fixed for Monday to Friday. I didn't give my. You're quite right. I abstained.
Okay. The next point as well is just in relation to the concerns surrounding how we deliver the programs and that side of it. I mean, obviously, our parking program and raise the cost of living crisis. This is something that we have within the town that's been agreed by exec sort of on an annual basis and stretches sort of 5 years into the future. So these schemes, we do take into account that, you know, these sort of peaks and troughs come with people's earnings and the hardships that people suffer. However, the complaints still keep rolling in with regards to parking, and to sort of drop them in favour of not doing anything, I don't think would benefit anybody within the town, which is why we undertake these consultations. The consultations obviously undertaken to gather people's opinions, and if it comes back that the majority of those aren't in favour, then we won't do them. But what we're suggesting of sort of pausing the scheme almost, I don't think is something we could really do. Not that would be of benefit to the residents of Luton anyway.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, I thought we were a scrutiny board and we could challenge executive decisions. So if Councillor Hussain has made that decision, surely we could go back to him and ask him to reconsider based on the feedback from OSB. I'm sure we can do that. And equally with Councillor Stevens' recommendations, this scheme looks like it's been dragging on for 5 years, and we're now trying to spend even more money on it to get the response rate up to implement something that's not even there. So at a time when, you know, money is tight, why are we, you know, getting consultants in? I'm sure we've got enough consultants in the council. Why are we getting consultants in to get the rate up so that we can then make a decision when clearly there's no demand for this in the area?
I would like to add my point. Yes, I was not for the scheme because the cost of living, where we are in the South Ward, the poverty is really, really high. And there are a lot of families there that are really struggling. A lot of children in the area, the children go to school, they don't have meals. And so how the family is going to really, I know this might seem small, but how the family is really going to afford to pay another bill on top of what they already have to pay. So for me, at this moment in time, with what we're going through the whole country, cost of living, everything, and the poverty, I just think it can be put on a hold for now. So, and that's my take on it. And that's why I said I was not happy. And I made it quite clear to Mark that I wasn't happy with the scheme. I wasn't happy with the hours because of the cost of living. And that is why. So if the residents, they can hear me, it's because of the cost of living, because people are struggling in that area. And you can see it from the figures about the poverty. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add onto what my colleagues are already saying, and I agree with them in the sense that, again, similar to what Councillor Stevens has said, these figures in terms of the ratios is just too narrow for us to even make a decision based on these figures. And when you're talking about sort of when we do surveys in general, the margin has to be a lot larger for us to make a decision in favour of the higher number. So I don't believe that we have an overwhelming response to be able to make a decision that yes, this should happen. And I agree with Councillor Abbas that we should take this back to executive, because I too do not agree with this scheme at all. Thank you.
Councillor Mahmood, and then I'd like us to have, okay. Do you want to come in before Councillor Mahmood, or do you wish to hear what Councillor Mahmood says first?
I'm happy to listen. Well, it's just to make a quick sort of take on that. I mean, in relation to the suggestions being carried forward, if that does get motion through, that it will impact on the scheme delivery and how we deliver our schemes, obviously, moving forward. And it's going to probably eat a lot of budget for consultation, not leaving a lot for delivery. So at the minute where we're looking to deliver potentially 2 or 3 schemes a year as part of the parking scheme, it might be that, you know, that it slows down to a pace of 1 a year by the time we do the extra consultation. Historically, the response rates have always been what they are within this. They've never been great. I take on board, you're absolutely right. If we had people going knocking doors, you probably would get like a better response rate, but only that is going to eat into the budgets and delivering. What we try and do in highways is, you know, balance out the delivery of schemes against what the people want. And historically, so far, I mean, I've been working here 15 years. I've worked on 3 different parking schemes prior to these 3 that I'm currently working on at the moment. They've hit some bumps in the road with regards to delivery, but on the whole, they've been delivered well. Mostly, there has been obviously some residents who are unhappy with paying for parking outside their property, but overall, residents are fairly happy with the proposals once they've gone in, and the fact that yes, it has improved the situation. They are able to park on the roads they like to park on. So ultimately, you know, those schemes haven't been pulled. That we have got them successfully in many other areas of the town, based on the similar response rate. So I'm not entirely sure it's the correct way to go forward, but obviously it's for the exec to make that decision.
Thank you. Last word for Councillor Reckley. Then I want to have a vote on whether or not we're accepting this that's put forward by Councillor Stevens.
Just a quick question on, look, I appreciate it's going to eat into budgets, but I don't want it to eat into people's pockets during what is a tough time for people. But it says here the lead officer advised that funding for the scheme was outside the remit of this consultation, and it could be some time before an agreement between the airport and the council would ever be reached about subsidising the cost of the permit. As a new council, I just wanted to know, why was it outside the scheme of this remit? And are you saying that that can never happen? The airport would in no circumstances subsidise the kind of cost of this and always have to be the residents?
Question's a little bit above my pay grade, unfortunately. I mean, the reality is I don't get to make the decisions about where our funding comes from. I only work with the capital bids and what I'm told. I don't have a say in whether the airport is going to subsidise or whether the hospital is going to subsidise, or whether the football club is going to subsidise all the different areas we have them in. At the minute, it's not something I've been made aware of. It's not our council policy to do that. I can only reflect and report on the policy that we have in situ at the minute. So at this stage, there are no proposals, although I know it's being discussed elsewhere at the minute, but they're not subsidising it. There's been no talks, as far as I'm aware, of them talking about subsidising it or any other sort of larger employee in the town.
I thought I was going to try and bring it to a halt, but it looks like Councillor Nicholas also wants to have an input.
It's only a very short question. So obviously the Parktown scheme is 8 AM until 6 PM, but this is only going to be priced for 2 hours a day. Is there other schemes in the town that have similar short hours? Because I am not aware of any, and I don't have much knowledge of different parking schemes.
Lucky you. There are a few in the town, yeah, predominantly around the train stations. Leagrave has one, Filmer Road, I'm trying to think of the road off there, Woodbridge Close has got one. There are a couple, I think, around the football stadium, and I think perhaps around the hospital as well. So there are other areas in the town we have them. I did discuss with enforcement as well prior to putting this as a recommendation, the feasibility of doing that, because obviously I appreciate that's a fairly tight window for them to carry out enforcement every day. It was discussed that if it was to be implemented in sort of the outer edges of the town, so perhaps the East Lutons of the town, up in Round Green, maybe even in Lucy, they might struggle to meet those targets because they've got to get people out to them in a specific time window to stay on top of all the other issues they've got to deal with. It was felt that within this area of town, it's something that could be proposed and probably managed, owing to the fact that obviously it's almost fairly central to the town, which is where the base is for the enforcement teams as they go out each day, and therefore felt they could do it appropriately. It's not something, like I said, I'd recommend putting it everywhere, and it certainly needs consideration and involvement with the enforcement team before putting them in here, there, and everywhere.
Councillor Fry.
It's less of a question and more of a comment, really, and it's sort of going back onto what Councillor Abbas said, because I do agree with what he said about it. If this scheme goes through, it gets pushed back maybe onto other roads. These roads have already been consulted, some of them, and that means we're going to incur more costs by having to maybe reconsult these same other roads at some point in the future. So I just want that all to be taken into consideration.
Okay. I think we need to bring this one to a halt now. So we have in front of us a recommendation from Councillor Stevens. Can we have a vote on whether we want to accept that going forward to executive or not? So can we have a vote on that? Can I ask who is in favour of that going forward? And who is against that going forward? Okay, so what have we got?
Can we take that again, please?
Can we do the,
I can do a roll call, Chair.
okay, do a roll call.
Yeah, should I do it? So this is asking to take votes on the recommendations proposed by Councillor Stevens. So you're either for or against that recommendation. So if I start with Councillor Ambia. For. Councillor Mahmood.
Against.
Councillor Abbas.
Against.
Councillor Ajisola.
Against.
Councillor Begum.
Against.
Councillor Franks.
For.
Councillor Fry.
For.
Councillor Mead.
For.
Councillor Ives.
Against.
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 Councillor Marshall.
For.
Councillor Nichols.
Against.
Councillor Stevens.
For.
Councillor Wincher.
Can I just ask something first?
Yes.
If we say yes or no to this, what happens to the two recommendations that are in the report?
You can also take a vote on that.
We can also take a
vote on the officer's recommendation.
Okay. And where do we stand on that?
So it's your vote, Chair. Are you for or against?
If we accept this recommendation, do we also get to vote on the others, or does that replace the ones that are in the report?
You mean vote on the recommendation as stated on this particular report? Yes, officer's recommendation, yes.
So we can vote on that as well?
Yes, Chair.
Okay. In which case I will vote for, but I want us to go back and vote on the officers' recommendations in the report.
Chair, we can do that if we just.
Sorry?
So you're voting for, Chair?
I am,
Okay.
but I wish to go back and vote on the officers' recommendations as well.
Okay, Will. Do you want the result of this one? 1, 2, 3, 6, 7 for against, 7 for the recommendation, and 6 against the recommendation.
Okay. But now I would like us to vote, and I would again like a roll call, if I may.
Yes.
In respect of the proposals and options. Now we have within the report 3 proposals that are going on there, and I would like to know what members would like to do in terms of the officer's recommendation. I feel that we maybe ought to look at each one of them.
Chair.
What's the view?
Chair.
Yes.
Can I just the overriding recommendation was to note the report, not to go down to the recommendations. There's no need to go to those recommendations.
Yes, yes, you're quite right. So if we're being asked just to note the recommendation in the report. Yes, Councillor.
The recommendation says note, support or comment on the officer's recommendation. So it's not just about noting, it's asking whether you support it or not, or comment on it. I move to ask to vote on that recommendation.
I think yes, what was just pointed out is correct. I think that what is going to matter very clearly here is for us to be very clear about the notes that we also give with the recommendation. And I will have discussions with Eunice about how we can make sure we get those represented correctly, because it's been a very detailed discussion. Okay, so do we note the report?
Should we take a roll call, Chair?
No.
Chair, we've already voted to note the report and to send the 3 paragraphs as a recommendation to executive.
Correct. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Sorry, that became very complicated. Right, we move on now to item 8. Item 8, which is the Luton 2040 progress report. So sorry that you've had to wait so long, but welcome, and we look forward to the report.
Thank you, Chair. We will attempt to do a short presentation very quickly for you and then leave as much time as possible for comments and questions. So the Luton 2040 progress report is our chance to talk about the impact we've made across 2040 over the last year. And it has some real highlights of some fantastic things that have changed. It has some areas where we need to do some more work, and my colleague Jamie will go through those in a moment. But just to give you the report in context, the aim of the report is to really help us make focused recommendations to the system as a whole as to how we need to continue to work together to make the biggest impact towards 2040. And so you'll see in your papers that actually the feedback we'd love from you today is firstly to note the report, but secondly to comment on those system-wide recommendations, because we really want your expertise in how we focus that in the right way to make the impact that we need to. And I also wanted to just make a quick note on how does this report fit with our corporate performance report. Well, our corporate performance report is the council's response to 2040. This is our system response, and as place leaders, that is why we are doing the governance of that today. And so this is about our whole system working together rather than just the council's response to 2040. I'm now going to hand over. Oh, can we flick on the slides, Kieran? Sorry, thank you. I've just said all that, so I don't need to say that again. I'm going to just hand over to Jamie now. He's going to go through the highlights and the areas for progress.
Thanks. So the report, we'll just go through the really top level highlights. Residents are happier and less anxious than they were. The last time that data was taken, which was a year previously. So happiness, for example, is that 64% of residents consider themselves to be happy compared to 53% the year before. There is the continued upskilling of our adult workforce, which has risen year on year over the last decade and is now at levels approaching the targets that we're trying to reach. There's lots of good news around our schools. 90% of our pupils are in good or outstanding schools. We've got fewer neat young people than the national average, and our rates of young offending have dropped significantly as well. One addition that's been made to the report since it was with Policy Group, and we thank Councillor Abbas for this, is just noting that there is still work to be done around some of the results in our schools in both primary and secondary. Luton remains a really good town for business, particularly for startup businesses. Our emissions per capita are dropping at a rate that would hopefully see us reach our net zero by 2040 targets, and they are dropping faster than happening elsewhere in the country as well. And we are a generous town, both in terms of Luton Rising's investment in the town, but also a Just Giving survey finding us in the top 3 in the country for our residents. Poverty is obviously at the heart of our 2040 vision. It's right there in our strapline to become a town free of poverty. And this data on the screen now is from our minimum income standard for Luton, which tries to assess the income needed to reach various levels of well-being, financial well-being within the town. What this tells us is that 8.9% of households in Luton can be considered destitute, up from 7.2% last year, and that 20.7%, so just over a fifth of households within Luton, still want for some of their basic needs, which again is a rise from the year previously. This is our baseline measure for poverty, and this is what we're working towards over the next 17 years. Next slide, please, Kieran. And so work to do. Obviously, poverty is one of those. Our work towards our baseline health measures is within the report. So we're talking about mortality rates, life expectancy. 2040 was a vision that has been worked on since 2019. In those 4 years, life expectancy isn't going to have changed a lot, but the report tells us that our baseline measures for those are worse than the national average, and so they will be the key measures that we'll be tracking over the next 20 years or so. Our population is inactive. We are walking and cycling less than we were previously. There are high levels of homelessness within the town, which we're all aware of. And despite that upskilling of the adult workforce, and despite some good news around employment in the town, our unemployment figures are still above the national average. We also note the way that poverty is impacting young people, with our surveys in schools showing that somewhere around 27% of young people in the morning that the survey was taken hadn't had breakfast before leaving to school. So that is another way that we're noting that poverty is impacting the lives of our young people. Jane.
So some really great things to celebrate, but also some challenging things that we really need to work on. And so some recommendations out of that. Firstly, our minimum income standard work, which hopefully you're all familiar with, a suggestion that we use that to simulate what different policy changes, the impact they would have on deprivation in particular and destitution, and so we can almost simulate what different decisions we make here have the impact they have for our residents. A recommendation that frontline workers, we support them across the system to be more aware of the support that is available for residents when it comes to helping with income and benefits and other welfare support. Further awareness across the system about how to embed Marmot principles within the workplace. And there's some really good work we can do here around upskilling our workforce in every area on how to embed Marmot into your work. A commitment locally for businesses to recruit locally. We've got a great commitment from our businesses to spend locally, but we need to have one for businesses to recruit locally, and some work done there. Finding more ways to listen to residents and young people in particular. The SHU survey is a really helpful way to hear young people's voice, but we need to do more of that. And then a recommendation around attainment in schools that Jamie just mentioned, because although children are going to good and outstanding schools, the attainment is lower compared with national. And then to enable this, and this will be my final point, there are 3 key things we want to do, and that is drive more Luton 2040 pledges. And our councillor Ambia over there has been one of those from Fusion Healthcare, has put in a pledge to Luton 2040. And we've got a goal to get 100 pledges by March, and we're on that way, on that journey. But that maps the contributions of our system and how we can work together to really deliver some great work. Develop our governance structures to ensure that we really have got a system-wide approach to problem solving. And then finally, developing a roadmap to 2040, which is underway, and I look forward to bringing that to you at some point in the next few months. Thank you. Any questions?
Yes, I've got a couple of questions, if I might. It said that over the last decade, you've seen a significant drop in the working age population without qualifications, which is great. But can you be a little bit more specific on what the lowest denominator is, perhaps what those qualifications are?
Just give us one moment while we find that in the report. Do you have the page?
Yes, it's on page 68.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry, we're just trying to find that. In the report, it talks about level 2 qualifications. I think that's an NVQ level 2.
Is that on the functional skills you're talking about on level 2?
Yes, I think so.
You. And also, it said that the town's employment rate is 69.4 compared to 75.5, the national average. And the report also said that employment rate was good. I'm just wondering, what are we doing to make sure that our employers are how you're working with the employers to try and raise that rate from 69.4% to closer to the average, and also on closing that gap perhaps on the lower pay, maybe making the getting the living wage.
In terms of the living wage, and thank you for that question, it's absolutely an ambition of Luton 2040 for every employer in Luton to be signed up to the living wage, and that's part of the Good Business Charter. So any business that goes for that has to be a living wage business. And that's where the Luton 2040 pledge comes in, is that we are asking businesses as they make pledges to pledge to be living wage businesses. So that's how we're approaching that. The other part of your question, I know that Sinead's team are working very hard across adult learning to provide more and more opportunities for people to enrol in courses. And I know that they were, I believe it was, oh, brilliant. We have adult learning here. I don't want to come and say something.
Hello, I'm Mary-Elle James. I'm the Adult Skills Delivery Manager for the Council. Yes, we are working really hard to provide more opportunities for adults to upskill and reskill, and particularly to get to level 2, so functional skills level 2, which is equivalent to 5 GCSEs. We currently have over £1.6 million worth of education and skills funding agency funding to work with adults. And we are also going to be using some of our UK SPF funding on skills. And we are also always looking for other pots of funding that we can use with adults. So we currently have some multiply funding from the Department for Education, and we're using that to upskill adults with maths, because that particularly with the change in the workplace towards more technologically based employment opportunities, that is really important to upskill people in maths.
Sorry, just going back to your point about the 5 GCSEs, then are you saying they're doing 5 different courses at functional skills that will give them equivalent of 5 GCSEs?
They have an entitlement to a full level 2, which is equivalent to 5 GCSEs. But in Luton Adult Learning, we provide maths and English. They can also do some vocational courses. So depending on what workplace they're going into, we provide different types of courses, for instance, customer service, business administration, health and social care, all those types of things. And obviously we work in partnership with Barnfield College as well, who provide a whole enormous range of level 2 courses.
Okay, so are we saying then with this drop in the percentage of population with that qualification, they're all getting 5 GCSEs, or is that just part of their entitlement and them not necessarily getting 5 GCSEs?
They're not necessarily getting it.
Thank you.
We are in the process of offering it, but they're not at the point where they've all got it.
Thank you. And just one final question, if I may. You said that we've got 23% of primary children taking part in the health service who haven't eaten any breakfast. Do we know why that is? Is it poor parenting? Is it the fact that they're in poverty? Do we know why that is and what we're doing about it?
We don't have the data to say definitively as to why. We can guess. I believe it's an anonymous survey for young people, so we can't map that against the town either to see where those trends are. My hunch would be, based on the statistics we see around poverty and some of my experience to talk person is a foster carer within the town with various young people, that poverty would be a big factor. But all we can do with this report, I guess, is highlight that. And then if we can feed that back to schools and say, this is what we're seeing from young people, can schools then be aware that there's a response to that?
Okay, well, given that schools have real funding issues, then how are we going to, as a council, address that? Because, you know, breakfast clubs are a great way of making sure students will get their food. Free school dinners is a very good way of making sure they get the food, but obviously the funding is an issue. So is there anything we can do to help them?
The shoe survey data is quite new data, and I believe the breakfast question was a new question that was asked this year that hadn't been asked previously. My understanding is Diraj and his team have gone, okay, we've got this data, what next? And they are currently looking at how they can respond to that data.
That's something you're actively working towards and trying to resolve. Thank you.
First of all, I think, unless I'm a bit confused just on the figures, because there seems to be some discrepancy on page 73 and 62, because on page 73 it speaks about 8.9% of Luton households in destitution. On page 62 it says 10.5%. And then it says on 73, 11.8% of households struggling to pay for some basic essentials, but that drops to 9.1% on page 62. So I don't know which figures are the most up to date. And shall I ask my question now?
Yes.
And one of the things we've seen at our ward surgeries is that, you know, there is support available, and this is something I'd like to see reflected in the report, but it's not being taken up. I mean, I know Healthy Start, for example, was not taken up by any. The vitamin kind of entitlement wasn't taken up by any women in Luton. We've got nearly 2,500 children on free school meals who are eligible that are still missing out. Part of the reason is because families aren't aware that there's this support available. When I've spoken, I'm only going off what residents have told me in our surgeries. Other residents feel the kind of shame and stigma associated with poverty prevents them from asking for help. But I haven't seen that kind of reflected in the report, what we're going to do to tackle the stigma associated with poverty, and secondly, what we're going to do to kind of advertise the work that we are doing. Is it a case of printing it in different languages, working with counsellors at ward surgeries, trying to kind of get that, you know, support out there, because uptake seems to be low. So we could have all the greatest schemes to try and tackle poverty, but if it's not been taken up, that's problematic. And just as a final question, is there a reason why we didn't use the government? I'm not saying I'm against the Joseph Rowntree definition, but the government's definition of poverty, the kind of barometer that they use is households that have a median income of less than 60% of the national average. Is that we're kind of discarding that, but now we're going to stick with the minimum income? Is that going to be throughout until Luton 2040?
I will answer the first and the third questions, and I'll leave the middle one to Jane. In terms of that first point, the 8.9% figure is the most up-to-date one. Apologies if there's an error elsewhere. That new figures came in while writing the report recently, so I'll make sure that's corrected, and thank you for spotting that. In terms of the JRF poverty definition type thing, we've gone with the destitution and the Joseph Rowntree's work and definition around that, because the minimum income standard that has been developed specifically to look at poverty within Luton is based off the Joseph Rowntree model. So the data we've got makes most sense with their definition of poverty as opposed to the wider government definition you were talking about, if that makes sense.
And just to answer your second question, I do think you raise a really important point about stigma. And I think we've got real plans to talk more widely about Luton 2040 with residents and what that means, and really embedding resident voice within the target outcomes of Luton 2040. And through that, and through raising awareness, that will have an impact on people feeling like they can speak up more clearly about the challenges that they're having. But that will take time, and it'll be a massive cultural shift, actually, because stigma attached to poverty has been a thing as long as there's been people. So I think there's going to be a lot of work needed to be done there. And then in terms of how we're raising awareness for what's available, I know Nikki's been doing some fantastic work around the Food First programme and also the Support for Luton Residents programme. She's going on a drive currently to get that in the hands of any frontline worker. So any frontline worker has got immediate access to what those services could be, so they can refer people immediately onto that.
But is there a reason why we, unlike other councils, why we haven't auto-enrolled children and young people who are missing out on their free school meals, because the last time I checked, I mean, I've got the figures from the Child Poverty Action Group that it saves a family £500 per child per year. But there's 2,500 kids in Luton that are eligible that are just not receiving. So what's the barrier to auto enrolment?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the entire question. This is related to children not receiving what? Sorry.
Free school meals, because we know in Luton there's around 2,400 that are eligible that are missing out, and that would bring their families a huge financial kind of, it'll help them out financially if they were. But other councils seem to have auto enrolled there to make sure no one misses out, but we don't seem to have done that.
I think you raise a good point. I think my understanding is that schools do their own drives to try and incentives to try and get people to sign up. There is a challenge with universal free school meals in that parents do not realise, because the children are getting free school meals anyway, that they still could sign up and get additional funding through pupil premium. And that is a challenge for schools, and it's something that they've been working on since the universal free school meals came in. There's probably more that could be done there, and we can definitely take that back to Diraj as he's exploring the question that your colleague here raised about the children who haven't got breakfast.
Thank you for that. I was just going to pick up on what Councillor Mahmood was saying. I think what he's talking about is auto enrolment for free school meals. And this is based on some work that's been done in some London local authorities, Lewisham and Wandsworth, where the council's got lots of data and it's using that data you have. And instead of parents applying, they automatically get enrolled for free school meals. And what that does then, that draws down additional funding for pupil premium for your schools. So the costs outweigh the amount of money you've got coming in. So I think something might be something for Mark Fowler to think about as part of the transformation programme. How do we use data that we've already got so that you automatically enrol people for free school meals, therefore the parents don't have to apply. And what that does, the schools will then get more funding from pupil premium, and there's a win-win there. So obviously there's a bit of a cost in doing that, but the income offsets that. So I think it's worth looking at that. I was reading in the report, it says education recommendations to follow. I know I made some comments about that previously. I just wondered where we'd got to that in terms of what the recommendations were, what we're going to be doing.
I've tried to chase a couple of people to try and get something there that, rather than us just trying to pluck something out of the air, we're trying to get something meaty and good in there. And I'd love a conversation with you, maybe outside of this, to be able to work on that. Because yeah, we want to get something good in there. Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair. Some very good data coming through this report. But I just want to put a word of caution out. One aspect, you've given the figures for good and outstanding schools. You need to be aware that we put out other data that shows, when it's split down into three, it shows special schools 100%, 100%, 91%, I think, for primary schools, but secondary schools have dropped down. So we cannot say that all of the schools, and we need to be consistent in the message that's going out. We can't just group it together and take an average, because we already published information that shows those three elements. That's the first. The second thing on the town centre, we need to be very careful, because I know from my ward that many people, especially the elderly, are no longer coming into the town centre, and a lot of people aren't even, reporting their disagreements. But I do come back to the fact a lot of good stuff that's in here. But I want to pick up something that Hazel Simmons actually said, which was the decline in resident satisfaction from 73 to 59% is very worrying. And I think we need to try and counter that. And I was thinking that perhaps we ought to move maybe a positive recommendation. And I was thinking that something along the lines that we roll out presentations around the town, highlighting the positives, maybe providing priorities and actions to achieve those priorities, And lastly, to maybe seek localised ways in which residents can support towards Luton 2040. I think something like that, we should maybe have that recommendation to go forward if that has any support in the chamber, because I think, let's counter this dissatisfaction by actually publicising, making sure that we publicise the good things that we want to put out, and even on some of the negative things, how we're trying to, as a priority, to overcome those. I mean, I'm happy to move that as a recommendation, Chair. Sorry. I saw what you think about that. My apologies.
No, all I'd add is, as Jane alluded to earlier, one of the things we're trying to do is to work with residents more towards 2040 and include their voice more. And I think I think somewhere in the report it talks about one of the things we want to create is a resident-friendly version of this report. This is, it's a big old chunk of paper that I'm not sure all residents want to read, but we want to create something that feels friendly for residents to be able to look at. And like you say, talk about, here are the things we can really celebrate, and here are the things that we need work on. What's good about the satisfaction data is, as included in the report, we can map it by area, and we can then also map, not included in the report, but we've got the data for it. We can also, I think, go with that data to see what the key concerns are in all of those wards as well. And so I think, as we continue with our kind of resident engagement in these areas, being able to go to specific areas and say, we know this is the issue here, how can we start a conversation about how we can work on that together, is absolutely, that has to be the future of 2040. It has to be in partnership with residents, rather than, as lovely as this conversation in this room is, what we want it to be is to be with and for residents.
With good posters and leaflets and things, taking it round ward to ward, even, or starting with maybe some of the lower satisfaction wards. That's probably my one. South Ward might be one of those, unfortunately. But and then pushing over the positives, because we do need to. Too many people do talk down Luton still, and we need to try and overcome that, I think.
Roadshow is exactly the word that Jane keeps using, and in fact the conversation we were having just the other day was about basically doing this in partnership with members, and so probably expect an email from us about a pilot one, and we'll partner with you on that really soon if you'd be up for that. That sounds really good.
Can I just come in, exercise a bit of chair's privilege? We've got Step Forward Newton doing campaigns. Surely we should be linking up with that. Because that's going to partially address what Councillor Stevens is talking about, because we're already doing it, and if we don't include some of this stuff in with that, we're missing a very big trick, in my opinion. Just a couple of points, if I may, and I'm sneaking in here. You were asking, and I'm going to draw people's attention to one part of your report in just a moment, but you're asking for things that would impact the report that you produced and so on. Can I make some just short observations, perhaps? Page 79, you talk about a green town, and then most of the text is dealing with sustainability, carbon emissions and so on. That's not what the general public thinks of as a green town. Green town is things like countryside and parks and their general living environment. So you're making some good points, but the title on the top is just going to confuse the general public. Page 80, you talk about, there's a section which says large-scale town achievements. And in amongst this report, which, by the way, I think is covered a lot of very important things, but what on earth is the dart doing in there? It's totally out of context, has no relevance to it at all. And on page 81, in the charts which you put, which I thought were quite interesting, of all the things you could possibly decide to use as a statement of in comparison with, and then you use SIPFA, which is the Public Accounting Organisation for Local Authorities. I know what it is, but 0.001% of the general public would know what CIPFA is. We need to find some better way of describing ourselves and our subdivisions. You can't use things like CIPFA, in my opinion. Anyway, that's just me. There are lots of other things I've highlighted, but I won't go through those now. But I would like to bring the board together with what you asked us to do in amongst, was to look at the 4 points 1 to 4, I think you said. I'm not quite sure why you decided to pick 1 to 4 when you've got 7, but they're on page 69. And if I take, I'll start and then I'm going to shut up again. If I just take your recommendations on page 69, the first one, poverty, I just don't understand the words you're using there. To me, they are corporate speak. Using data tools such as the minimum income standard to explore policy interventions. What on earth does that mean? And the second one, under number 1, create a poverty-proof work pack for organisations and businesses. That also doesn't mean anything to me. I'm not sure what the general public would make if it read it. I suspect you'd get a very glazed look because I don't think it's intelligible. And I know I'm being ultra critical, but when you've got recommendations like that in a report that's otherwise so good, it just detracts from it, in my opinion. But that maybe is just me. Okay, sorry, I promised I'd shut up, so I'm going to shut up.
Do you want me to respond? I'll respond quickly. Thank you so much for those points, because I do think language is incredibly important. And this report was written for system leaders. That's who it was written for. And I do take your point that some of that language is very corporate, and many of our system leaders may also not understand what we're saying. So we can go back and reword those. The plan is to make a resident-friendly synopsis of this so that we can share it much more widely. We would not expect many people to read this and take this on board as it is.
Don't know if I can make a suggestion here, but under poverty, can we put, raise awareness of the schemes available and to push them out? Because I still think 2,500 children in a town like Luton missing out on free school meals is quite a big number. No one really taking up Healthy Start during the month of May, I think, is quite bad. A lot of people didn't know where they could access warm meals. I found out through Nikki, and I thought it was great. But if we could put a point in there about making people aware about that, and if possible, putting it in different languages, so if they can't read it in English, they can read it in.
Yeah, we can definitely add something in around that. Thank you.
Can I just firstly ask, how are you collecting this data? Like, are you sending out questionnaires or something to residents, or how are you collecting it?
The data in this report is from a real variety of sources. So the main data point for it is the Joint Strategic Needs Assessment, which is a public health document that captures data from various sources. So we haven't done, I think I'm right in saying, unless I've missed something, we haven't done any data collection ourselves. So it mainly comes from other, and there's been no data specifically captured for this report. So this is all some captured by the council, some captured by other sources that we have collated together to form this report. And what we've done is work with business intelligence to find the key measures across the 2040 outcomes, and that's formed the evidence base from which the report's been written.
Okay, because my only concern is that it's probably not going to be very accurate if you were to do sort of like, a data collection on a wider scale that is capturing all the people from sort of different wards, because otherwise it's a bit difficult to tell from this. sort of what wards? I mean, you named Central, you named Dallow as being the most deprived, which fair enough they are, but also Farley is a very deprived area. And in terms of sort of judging how happy the population of Luton is, I think it's a bit misleading, to be fair, because it's not, to me, it's not representative of the whole of Luton. So that was just one of my points. But my second point, or second question I'd like to ask in terms of adult education. In Lucy, we've got a few things happening in terms of adult education where people are accessing some courses and other courses are having to be dropped because the numbers are low. How are you sort of addressing the needs of other learners in terms of, if you look adult learning, predominantly looking at adults who haven't got their GCSE English and Maths. Now, some of the reasons could be because they've got undiagnosed learning needs like dyslexia or other sort of milder symptoms of learning needs. How are you kind of capturing those people? Because they, again, like Councillor Fry said, you know, there is stigma attached to people attending such classes, and they might feel threatened if they were to go to an English class and asked to read a particular passage that for them, comprehending it takes more time than what they're actually visually reading. So it might not make sense to them. So how are you kind of going to capture it? I'm just thinking on my own ward where we have a need for English and Maths, but the uptake is low. And the reasons I get from residents is because they just don't want to face the embarrassment of not being able to identify words or pronounce words properly. So how are you kind of looking to sort of tackle those sort of issues?
So our Education and Skills Funding Agency funding is split up into two separate streams. So one stream is the adult education budget, which is for accredited courses such as functional skills and GCSEs. And the other strand of that funding is called community learning funding. And that's for non-accredited type of courses that are less pressurised, that are a hook into learning for adults. So they are things around everyday activities that people might undertake, such as sewing, and they'll come and do a sewing course, but actually embedded within that are lots of maths and English. And that gives our tutors plenty of time to actually initially assess where those adults are, and then to understand what their barriers are, and also then to be able to help them get over those barriers and then kind of point them in the right direction to eventually to be able to get onto an adult skills course. But sometimes people are a long way away from an adult skills course, and so we work with them over a number of months or maybe sometimes even years to get over those barriers to make sure that we can get them onto that pathway. So that's what that community learning funding is all about.
For example, if you've got a student that you've identified has these barriers, would you do typically an assessment? Because I know the assessments as well are quite expensive. So would you do those assessments to find out whether they do have additional learning needs? Because for some students, whether they're mature or young students, knowing that they have something or they're facing particular barriers time and time again for a particular reason could be the answer to them overcoming those barriers sometimes. So would you be doing those kind of assessments even though they are quite costly?
Yes, absolutely. We've got a whole team within adult learning of specially trained special educational needs experts. And we have one member of staff who we have recently put through a course that enables him to diagnose dyslexia. So whereas we used to contract that out and it was very expensive, so it meant that we couldn't put that many people through that, but now we can do it in-house and we can do that with as many people as we need to. But we've also got a team of specialists that sit with him and they can diagnose other things. So it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody that's got a learning difficulty has dyslexia. There are other things, but yeah, we've got a team that can work with that. We've also got a team of support people, so classroom assistants, and we've also got a team of volunteers, and those people can come in and work one-to-one with people when it's needed.
Thank you. I think that will be great for a lot of, and is reassuring for a lot of adult learners, and hopefully will bring that unemployment rate down, because sometimes it is the fact that they don't want to be in a position where they have to do something in front of other people or in front of an audience where they might feel quite threatened or embarrassed. So I think that will be quite a great initiative. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just take us back then for a moment to the recommendation which is sitting in front of us for this report? Clearly, we note the report, and certainly there is lots of information in the report which is very useful, and we thank you for that. Newton 2040 is a critical plank of what we're doing as a council. So what you're reporting here is very important to us in the town and in the council itself. Can I just ask, though, members of this board, the second part of the recommendation, which is to support and comment on the system-wide recommendations 1 to 4, as outlined in Appendix A. What overriding message do you want this board to pass forward about this report on 2040, please?
Thank you, Chair. Well, my comments on the report as a whole, it's a bit of a mix match for me, because at part of it says the residents are happier, and then you get to the next page, you find worrying is increasing. They're getting worried, and of course, you get to the health side of things, you find out that the expectancy for the male and females is one of the lowest in the region. And just within this meeting now, due to the question from my colleague, we'll find out that the data you've used is been sourced from maybe some specific sources and not direct. Is there a way, do you have a plan in the nearest future or going forward to source for data by yourself? That's my first question. And number two, I want to ask, if having written this report, you've gone through it, do you think we are in line to achieve this sustainable target we have for 2040? Do you think we're in order? Yep, that's my question for now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those questions. I think on the first point, we want this report to get better every year, and I mean that both in terms of we want the results to say that our residents are happier and healthier, but also we want to be able to do better reporting towards what we're trying to do in 2040. And so currently we are reviewing our key performance indicators across all of the outcomes that we're working towards, so that we can then use the same measures year on year on year for the next 17 years and find the best measures and the best data sets for those. To some extent, the 2040 team inherited some measures and some outcomes, and we're in the process of reviewing those alongside service directors and corporate directors, so that we can all agree these are going to be the best data set, the best measures and the best data to tell us what we need to know about 2040. So I think this report will look different in future iterations, and I think it'll be better and more insightful than it currently is. I think what this does is paint a snapshot of where we are. What we want is for future reports to be able to tell us a little bit more about the success of the work that we're doing towards 2040, and we're having lots of conversations and putting processes in place now that will allow us to do that. I'll let Jane answer the second question.
Chair, do you want me to answer the second question?
Yeah.
So the short answer is yes. I think the long answer is that each different priority, so if we think about our net zero priority, we've had a 3% decrease in carbon emissions over the last 15 years every year. So we absolutely are on track to do that. I really believe that by 2040 we could be net zero as a town. Other priorities there are other challenges around those, and I think there would need to be a more detailed conversation around each of those priorities and the progress that we're making towards them. And I'm happy to have that with you outside of this setting.
I'd also just add to that, the work that we're doing now around the measures will help us to answer that question better. So I think at the moment we don't even really have a clear definition of what it would mean to be a child-friendly town, for example, or to be able to say that we support a strong, empowered community built on fairness. So what we're trying to do now is also just to be able to answer that question better as well.
Thank you, Chair. I was just going to say, I mean, this report is a mixed bag. There's some really positive figures in there, but equally there are others where, you know, we need to do more. And I think that report reflects that. I agree with the recommendations. I think the education one we need to sort of list out and look at what we want to look at. But I think taking your point, Chair, I think could do with some plain English in writing. So maybe an idea to look at the whole report and look at sort of plain English and making sure that. So I don't know what the average age for a GCSE. Somebody needs to be at a reading age of about 14. So if you could write it at that kind of level, I think people will be able to read it and understand it. So my comment is support it. It just needs to be a bit plain English.
I'd just like to ask, I know you've done the report and it's, you know, varied, but do you have any engagement with the young people? Because obviously we're looking ahead to 2040, okay? And I mean, young people, I mean, from the ages of about, say, from year 9 upwards, just some engagement, just to get some input from them as well, because obviously they are the future. So just to, is there anything, are they any involvement in any of this?
So I think with, as Jamie has said, the data that we have got has all come from places like the JSNA, the SHU survey, the Social Progress Index. The SHU survey is directly taken from young people's voice. So that was it about 400 children, young people across the town who answered that. But there is a lot of work to do to engage with young people and hear young people's voice within the 2040 agenda, as there is with residents. And as we were talking about the roadshow, we're developing plans to do that more. I know that the Child Friendly Town team are running a conference for young people. I believe it's the 14th of November, and I'm sure councillors would be very, very welcome to attend that, to sort of kickstart their strategy and how we're going to develop a stronger young person's voice across the work that we are doing.
Can I just ask them, that's the case, but the roadshows, have they been publicised a lot with like the schools, the high schools, the head of years or the pastoral teams? How widely publicised, how widely has it been pushed into the schools, the high schools?
We haven't started them yet, so and we have this is an idea in formation that's come out of this report and other things that we're doing, but I can absolutely, when we get to that stage, take that forward as an action to make sure they're really well publicised with schools.
Thank you.
Word, please, Councillor Stevens.
I didn't want us to lose the very good idea that was obviously in the making about rolling it out around the wards and working with the councillors in the wards to put out the positive aspects and the achievements. I think that's, I mean, I think it would be quite useful to bring back something that adds on to this to see how that's going to work out in the future. Maybe coming back to a future board so that we can actually work alongside you in the various wards. Yeah.
Be happy if we were to add to the recommendations that we're requesting that there is a concerted effort, including councillors, for a rollout of the progress to date. Everybody happy with that? Yes, so if we can add that in as well, if we may. But thank you very much. Very useful report. As you can see, it's generated a lot more debate. And I think had you been on earlier, you might have got even more. Thank you very much for the report.
Thank you. Really appreciate all the engagement, comments and questions. Really helpful. Thanks.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, so now we're on to item number 9, believe it or not. We're on page 119, which is London Luton Adult Learning Self-Assessment Report for Ofsted. Who's going to? Oh, you're going to lead that. Thank you very much.
Good evening, Chair. Good evening, councillors. I'll try and make this as brief as possible because I know we're a bit tight on time. I'm here this evening to ask for your permission to send Ofsted self-assessment report off on the 31st of January.
Sorry, there was separate conversation going on, making it difficult for us to hear you.
Okay, so I'm here to ask for your permission to send our Ofsted report off to Ofsted on the 31st of January. The report self-assesses Luton Adult Learning in regards to the Ofsted criteria. It covers the time period of the 1st of August 2022 to the 31st of July 2023. So that's the last academic year. So they expect you to self-assess in arrears. They look at 4 criteria. Ofsted look at the quality of education. They look at behaviours and attitudes. They look at personal development, and they look at leadership and management. We were actually Ofsted inspected in April of this year, and we received a grading of good. We have self-assessed that we still remain good, and we are working towards outstanding. So in the main, the report shows you how we've graded ourselves in each of those areas. Obviously, we've identified many strengths, and the strengths that we've identified were those that were identified by Ofsted during the inspection. And we've checked to make sure that we still have those strengths and that we maintain them. We've identified some areas for development in each of the 4 key areas. Again, many of those were identified during the Ofsted inspection. And there are some additional ones that we've identified for ourselves that we want to work on.
I'd like to start, if I may, with Councillor Fry. The reason for that is because she has professional expertise in this area. So I'd like us to hear what her view is on some of the items.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to have a look at one of your challenges that you've put in there, looking at the awarding body and Pearson Excel comment and the change of the grades. Why do you feel that is acceptable to put in that format and not address that as something that all teachers in September of that academic year were warned that all of the grade levels boundaries would be going up to pre-COVID levels because COVID wasn't going to impact education anymore? I understand, being a teacher of functional skills, that in 2019 there were a lot of reforms. But it does worry me that the wording in there is going to leave you open to Ofsted saying, well, I'd like to come back and have a look at your English provision, please, because of some of the wording. So how can we look at that again, perhaps, and make that a little bit more robust?
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor. That's a really, really good point, actually. To expand on that, some of the problems that we had were our new tutors. So as it does say in the report and another place in the report that we've had difficulty recruiting, that one of our challenges has been our inability to recruit enough experienced staff. So in order to remedy that, we had been recruiting for potential and then training people up. And so that is one of the key areas there where staff weren't quite as up to speed as they should be. So yeah, you're absolutely right. We need to change the wording on that, make that more explicit.
I think so, because I think you quite rightly say you put it into the other page. resits organised. I mean, we know that there's lots of resits for functional skills, but it is particularly that wording. And I know Ofsted, having experienced it, do not want you to put COVID in there at all. It's not an excuse anymore. What sort of testing are you doing to help address those issues? Obviously, if you're training your staff and it's an ongoing thing, you know it's a weakness. And so what testing are you putting? I mean, are these students who are not getting level 2, are they getting level 1 before they progress on to level 2? They are.
Yes, they're getting level.
So at least they've got something, which is good. But how are you addressing the weaknesses that are stopping them getting that level 2? You're doing things like YARC testing, phonics testing?
Yes, we are. There's several things that we're doing. One of the key things is because in excess of 90% of our students have got English as a second language, we're using our English as a second language team in order to train up our functional skills team in how to deal with people in the classroom that have English as an additional language. So we've done lots of in-house training around that. We've also had some training via Pearson, the awarding body. And we're also utilising the levy in order to put people onto teaching apprenticeships. So we've kind of come at it from a three-pronged approach, really.
So I think there was one other thing there. If I can just find it. It's a comment. In your recommendations, the Ofsted report talked about the spelling and grammar issues. I didn't quite see that in your area for development. Do you think that might be worth putting in, perhaps, as an area to develop, so that you're in line with what Ofsted were suggesting to you? I think it said too few teachers identify and correct learners' punctuation, and I might have misread it, but I couldn't see that in the report.
Apologies, Councillor. I thought I had actually put that in, but yes, you're absolutely right. That does need to go in. Yes, that will go in. Thank you.
Questions? Yes, Councillor Baz.
Thank you, Chair. I was quite curious about, in terms of delivery of these services, are these actually delivered by the council or through third parties, or how is the adult? Is it done through the council? Is it all through the? Okay, all right, fine. There was a couple of queries that I saw a table on there, and I think one of them mentioned male learners, but I couldn't see any female learners. And we know in Luton there's quite a lot of inactive females who would like to go into work and probably don't have the functional skills. So I just wondered why that was missed off and whether that's something we're tracking. And I think the rest of it is really Ofsted's critique of us, what we're doing. I just was interested to know how we are addressing those areas of development that Ofsted have tried. Is there an action plan or something like that? That should that go with this report, or is that a separate document?
Thank you, Councillor. Yeah, I'll address those three questions. So, yes, the council receive an education and skills agency funding grant, and then that comes to the adult learning team within the council. And so everybody within the adult learning team are employed by the council, but they are paid via the education and skills funding agency grant. So that's how that happens. Yes. Oh, sorry. Can you say the second part of that question again?
Of our report, I don't know what it's about. Luton adult learners percentage of demographic groups, and it's got on there male learners, unemployed learners, ethnic minority, 65 plus, low or no qualifications. But I was just intrigued why we haven't mentioned female learners.
Traditionally, the majority of our learners are female. So we track how many males we're attracting into the service, because numbers for male learners have traditionally always been very low, and we do everything that we can to attract more men into the service. So yeah, women tend to come, particularly for ESOL courses, which is English for speakers of other languages. So yeah, it's about getting men in, and obviously getting men in so that they can get employment.
What are we doing in terms of to address some of those areas of development? Is there an action plan, or should that be part of this report or not?
So there is actually a quality cycle, and the self-assessment report forms the first part of that quality cycle. The self-assessment report goes to our governing board, it comes to overview and scrutiny board, it goes to executive committee, and then it goes to Ofsted. Once it's actually been agreed by the various bodies that it goes through, we then put together a quality improvement plan for the service. So the quality improvement plan is the next step on from the self-assessment report.
Councillor Stevens.
Thank you, Chair. I believe that there's quite a strong outward provision of special adult learning for especially English as a second language. And I believe, I know it used to run on Charles Street, whether if it's still running, a lot of it is outreach, either one-to-one or in small groups of individuals. Can I just understand how that's evaluated and how what development is going into that? So it's not in a formal classroom setting, but going out into individual houses and on a one-to-one or going out into small groups. Is that still happening? And are we doing anything now with new coming people such as the Romanians, the Romanas, and also with some of the migrants that are here?
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, we are doing a lot of work around our English for speakers of other languages provision. We are no longer in Charles Street. That was many, many, many years ago. We are actually based on floor 2 of Arndale House in the Mall. Okay. And the reason that we are there, a corporate decision was taken a few years ago, 6 years ago, to move us from our base at Lee Manor High School into the town centre so that we were accessible to everybody in the borough, because all the bus routes come into the town centre. So we were moved there to make us accessible to all. However, we do still go out into the community where there is a need, and very often that need comes about through councillors like yourselves coming to us and saying, you know, during my surgery, I've had a lot of inquiries about ESOL classes, and then we will go and find out what the need is, and then we'll put a course on locally. We particularly use Bury Park Training Centre as one of our outreach sites, but we will go to any ward where there's a facility for us to teach from. We don't actually go into people's houses, and we don't tend to deliver one-to-one, although we can give one-to-one support. So as I was saying previously, we've got a team of classroom assistants and volunteers that are trained up to help in the classroom. So we can provide one-to-one support where that is needed. We can also put people through our community learning funded courses, which, as I mentioned before, don't have an accreditation with them. And that gets people then ready for qualification courses. And those classes do tend to be smaller. We also, we do go out in the community, but we also do try and get people into our centre, even though we go out into the community, because obviously we're looking towards getting people employed. And so we try and get them to come into the centre as much as possible so that they are not then isolated in a very small community. But absolutely, we'll go and work there if necessary. And then your other point about whether we work with people new to the town, yes, absolutely we do. When we had the Afghan refugees a couple of years ago, we had some Home Office funding and we went to the hotel and worked directly in the hotel with them. We work with refugees now. They come into the centre, they come into the Bury Park Training Centre. Yes, we absolutely do. So anybody new to the town, we welcome in and make sure we work with them.
Slightly different aspect. Do we roadmap people at the higher end of the training, if you like, onto foundation courses at the university? So has that been developed as a clear link going forward? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So we have really good, strong partnerships with the university, with Barnfield College, with Central Beds College. We make sure that across the piece, we're working with all the education providers, and we make sure that there are strong pathways to various different employment opportunities and various different qualifications. We work also very, very strongly with the National Careers Service. They come into our centre and they see people there to help them map out a pathway to whatever award it is they ultimately want to achieve. We've also got trained National Careers people within our own service. They're not trained as National Careers advisors, but they're trained to give information and advice. They're not trained to give guidance, but they're trained to give information and advice, and they make sure that our learners are clear about where they're going, and they also help them negotiate the various different offers that are out there. Within our service, Economic Growth and Skills, our service manager has instigated a provider forum for people out in the community that are running organisations that provide skills offers. Okay. And so we're getting that forum to come together so that there aren't hundreds and hundreds of CV writing courses and nothing else to get someone on a pathway to a particular course. So we're looking at everything across the board within the town to make sure that people are clear about where they're going and they don't get confused and then drop out because it's too confusing.
Thank you.
Can I take us back then to our recommendation? We're being asked to decide that OSB is recommended to comment and endorse the Adult Learning Services self-assessment. Sorry, I beg your pardon. Sorry, I hadn't seen you.
No problem. Just one quick question. You know, on page 128, where you've got your areas of development, on that last point, you've got that to future teachers identifying correct learners, punctuation and grammatical errors. How are you supporting those teachers who might be dyslexic themselves? So I'm just thinking of myself when I'm teaching, because I teach mature students at the university. I'm dyslexic quite badly in the sense that I won't pick it up unless I put it through, say, for example, Grammarly or something like that, whether they've got punctuation or grammatical errors. So how are you supporting those teachers that might have those sorts of issues because they may not pick it up straight away?
Where we have appointed people who haven't got above a level 3 teaching qualification, we're using the apprenticeship levy to upskill them to go through a level 5 diploma in teaching and learning. We also have our SEND team who would be able to identify any learning needs and an advice on any support that was necessary. We've also buddied up our English teachers with ESOL teachers so that they can then support the English teachers to take on different strategies to use with the ESOL learners that they have in their classes.
But how does that support the teacher who is a qualified teacher? For example, myself, okay. I'm a qualified teacher. I can teach up to level 6. So in my sense, I would look to my employer, how are you going to support me to fulfill my role and support students? By how am I to identify these errors?
So the SEND team, the SEN team, the Special Educational Needs team, support any teachers with those issues. So we do have one teacher who has dyslexia. So we've procured Dragon Speak for her. So she uses that on her laptop and she uses that when she's marking work. She also has peer support from another teacher. She also has that wider support that Annette's just mentioned. So it's not just for learners, that broader support is for all of our teachers as well. So anybody with a need can take advantage of that support.
We also have a sharing good practice, which is monthly. So all teachers come to that and they They discuss anything that they feel that they need support with, but they also deliver to each other. So if we have one strength in one area, then they will deliver a session to the rest of the teachers.
Okay. Thank you for that. That's great. The other thing is just more of a request. If we could have, as counsellors, to put up in our surgeries a list of courses, because I know unless you have the demand in a particular area, you won't really deliver. But if we as counsellors don't know what courses in the first place you offer, other than the general sort of managing your money and cooking on a budget and English and maths, if you could let us know what else you offer, maybe we can help you attract more students. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for mentioning that. We are actually in the process of putting together a brochure for counsellors, which will explain everything that we're doing within the economic growth and skills team. So it will include a list of courses that Adult Learning run. It will talk about the provider forum. It will also talk about the Employment and Skills Board and all the things that we're doing within that department. So yes, definitely that is on the way. It's in progress.
I can go back now to those recommendations, and particularly asking the question of our professionals who know more about this than certainly I do. Are we happy with the fact that we can recommend and endorse the self-assessment report for submission to Ofsted? Do you feel that we can?
I think it needs a couple of amendments, which I've suggested and which you said you take on board. For example, where it said about the SPAG, they hadn't added leading to learners being clear and addressing the issue with the COVID comments. Because I think if we put it in its current format, we're likely possibly to get the English provision looked at when they've just had a good. And it's clear that it's a good provision. It's just that we've had issues with the English that needs to be addressed in the report so that we don't trigger a report from Ofsted.
Accept that view?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Councillor. And we will get the report revised and have that rewritten, and then we'll send it into Eunice for you to have a look at.
Okay, so subject to those amendments, we happy with that? Yes? In which case, thank you very much for the report. Sorry it's dragged on so late, but we've got yet another one to come, I'm afraid. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Should be on to item 10.
Chair, item 11.
Item 11, is that? Item 11 now, yes. Sorry, me. I wanted to take you back to yet another one that we've already done. Okay, item 11, forward programme. Over to you.
Chair, if I may take members to page 144, the meeting of the 17th of January 2024. It does have a number of new items on there. Most of them look like they're quite, meaty subject areas. And I'm just wondering whether members want to review that particular meeting agenda.
Do we have a view whether we want to try and move any of those items from the meeting of which date? The
17th of January, and that's page 144.
Page 144. The suggestion from Eunice is that we might want to consider moving an item.
Could we move? I don't know about local policing and police presence, since we've had the PCC down and had a lengthy discussion with him. Could we move that? Could we move the local policing and police presence and crime? Move that and step forward progress update. I don't know, because it looks like we'll be here all night at this rate.
Suggestions? Yes, David Trent.
Well, if we're looking at the 17th of January meeting, I see we're looking at the Scrutiny's role as the accountable body for SEMLEP. I thought the government had stopped funding SEMLEP and so it was going to disappear. So what are we going to scrutinise if it's not there anymore?
Well, that seems to be one off. Thank you, David. Any more suggestions or comments? Yes, we are. I'm going to make a suggestion, given the timing now. I'm going to make a suggestion. Can I ask that each of the members of the board go through the forward programme and make any suggestions just as a quick email through to Eunice? I'll then review with Eunice the suggestions that are being made, because otherwise I think we're just going to keep ourselves going for a long
Can I just ask one thing? It's in that big list at the back. If we have got gaps and some things have been crossed out on some of the forthcoming meetings, could we bring the HMO? I think it's in the list. It's the HMO. Where have we gone? HMO's annual progress. That's quite an important item. So could we bring that forward into one of the slots on anything that's being cancelled?
If you can put that through as a note to Eunice, I'll discuss that then through with Eunice, and we may well, if he'll permits his time, to drag Councillor Frankston as well, just to have a quick look through some of those items as well.
Thank you.
There is already an Article 4 direction item. Is that? I think that it's, relevant to HMOs in some ways. Is that what we have that on the 17th of January agenda?
On after March, that was all. But I'll put it through to Eunice and to yourself. Yeah.
Sorry we've been so long tonight. I think we would have been even longer if we'd let the questions go on with some of the reports. But thank you all very much for your inputs.